Hey, what is up, everybody? Jeremy here. And guys, I'm excited for the conversation we're going to have with us today. We have William Tucker, who is the co-founder of Charity United. And it's a charity that's really helping people to rediscover literacy. Because when you look at it, the ability to read and write and have command of language is I think, one of the biggest single deciding factors on what our life is going to be and where we're going to go. So, William, thank you for hanging out with me today, man.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, and an absolute pleasure to be a guest on your show here.
So before we kind of dive into, literacy and a lot of what you're doing with that, I want to know first and foremost, you've been working in, some of the hardest places in the world in which to do so, a lot of slums in India and in other places. Number one, what's motivated you to handle literacy? Number two, why aren't you going to the easy places, man?
All right. Well, it was actually a journey. Okay, what motivates me, right?
Yeah.
I think all my life, I've actually been a believer in human rights, right? And I think that's partly my upbringing. I was very lucky to have a quite incredible grandmother. Okay, unfortunately she's passed away, but she was one of the first Swedish female sociologists, right? And she broke through that whole gender barrier in Sweden, she actually took me out to Africa on some of the sociological work she did as a young boy, right? And I managed to be her luggage carrier, right? But, I got exposed to the world, and I saw that things weren't equal. And this really, impressed on me at a young age. Wow. There is some work to do, and I have it really lucky as a Western kid.
So then for you, when did you start actually taking command of that, right? Because I think there's, noticing there's a problem, there's kind of noticing what's happening out there, but there's a lot of people that see that and they're not really motivated to do anything about it. I'm curious for you when that connection came.
Okay, well, I think... as kids, we get really motivated, but there's not a lot we can do, right?
Yeah.
We just want to make the world a better place, right? As a kid, This is all our dreams. And I think then you have to mature through life a little bit, right? Yes, I always, help with volunteer stuff, and I was big into charity and helping the community, and I've done all sorts of stuff. But, 5-6 years ago, there was a war going on, in the Middle East, and, we saw it on the news, and I thought, my wife, spoke to me and said, hey, I'd really like to go check this out firsthand to see, what's the actual truth, right?
That's one of the single hardest parts, man, because, if you watch any news channel, you could think, it's always the extremes, right? No matter what's happening, we're all going to die. That's kind of what it comes down to. And you really want to see, what is the actual scene, right? It's they make a lot of money off of scaring the hell out of us.
You're so right? So my wife went down there, right? And, we found the scene completely different than what is portrayed on the media, But at the same time, there were thousands of kids, fleeing from this war zone, right? With nothing, and desperate parents.
I had that happen. We went to Greece a bunch of years ago when they were having the quote unquote rioting and stuff like that. So we went for a vacation and we went around Athens and it was beautiful. And I go to one of the people running a shop. I'm we were told in the news it was terrible, and my mother-in-law was nervous we were going. And she goes, "Oh, that square over there is where they burn stuff, and they do it a couple times a day, and then they'll stop." I'm like, "Oh, I guess it's nowhere near as bad as they made it seem on TV."
Exactly, right? But we did find a situation where there was just a lot of kids in need of help, right? So, we started doing what we needed to do, and there was a snow zone over there, and these kids were coming from a hot climate, but they're coming in shorts and t-shirts, and all of a sudden they're in the snow, and nobody doing anything, right? So, we decided to get involved, and, for 4 or 5 months, all of a sudden we're supplying clothes to kids day and night. And somehow figuring out how to fund it, right? And that's when you find out how many good people there are in the world, how many people are willing to help, and how many really go out of their way to contribute. Okay. Got in touch with a lot of other volunteer organizations, and then we started to see that, one of the biggest problems of volunteers is burnout. Okay. Because there's always another war. Okay, like one emergency ends and the new one starts up. I mean, it seems like there is a production line of disasters.
You're not kidding, man.
so, and it's just never ending. And I've seen so many volunteers, who really start out like with a burning desire to change. But they just go into apathy. They start to give up because it never ends. And that's when we really started looking, okay, what's underlying all of this? Like, what is at the root of all these social problems, all these world problems? Why all these wars, right? And the answer we kind of got to is like, wow, there's a real lack of education. There's a real lack of literacy. And when there's a lack of literacy, people are easy to manipulate. And to be honest, I'm so sick and tired of the manipulation of people, that turns good people against each other, right? Simply because, they take at face value, what is reported by the media, what is, and so we really kind of started going, okay, if we can get people literate, if we can get them like really understanding and inspecting the information that they get, right, then things will start to calm down.
Well, the thing that's interesting about that, William, is I think there's kind of two levels of that too, right? Like, there's education and then there's no education. And no education, obviously there's no literacy, there's a lot of those issues. But also you have what we feel is education, and there's a lot of literacy issues in that, right? Like you look at even what we have in the US, there's a lot of people that would consider themselves to be, educated, but they're not a lot of people that are literate, which is very interesting because you find they don't know definitions of things, they don't understand grammar rules, and because of that, there's a lot of barriers there people don't know about. Do you get what I'm saying? Like there's kind of two levels to it. There's the people that actually that know they don't know, and then there's the people that think they know, and it turns out they don't know.
Yeah, and you know what? You're so right. We see this, right? In actual fact, it's sometimes harder to educate kids that have had a few years of schooling, right? Because, okay, you talk about literacy. Okay, what is literacy, right? What really is literacy? And you actually have to take a look at this. Because, when people talk about literacy, usually it's, I've read this big book, and I've read that big book. Fine, right? You can read all the big books in the world. Can you understand what you read, right? Do you actually understand what you read? And, this is what we really started focusing on, reading with understanding. So if you correctly define literacy as being able to easily understand what you read and use what you read, now you have an entirely different view, okay? Yep. And I think that's one of the big problems in our education. It's very much focused on correct pronunciation and how fast do you read.
Well, I know for me, like something I really struggle with as a kid, and I kind of look at it as criminal to do to kids, is we learn by context clues. Well, you just read the sentence, based on the word you don't know, tell me what that word means. And you could find that you a lot of times pull out the opposite or a simile or something like that, and you're not actually learning anything that way.
Absolutely, and I think you've hit it on the nail over there. And this is one of the first big things, that I have to crack through with the kids or even adults. And like, okay, there is such a thing as an invented definition, right? And this is what you get taught to do in schools right now: is invent your own meanings. And exactly what you said, right?
Yes.
You look at the text, and you look at the text around it, and you use your imagination. In order to figure out what that word will mean. Okay? Well, we've thrown standard, time-proven education out of the window right there. Because it didn't used to be this way. You went back 80, 90 years ago, you did the logical thing. You used the dictionary and you found out what a word meant. Right?
Yes.
And this is what builds literacy. Reading and understanding what the words means.
So let me ask you this, and there's so many rabbit holes we could go down on this one, man. Because even like you look at the looking things up in a dictionary now, like they're changing words in dictionaries too, but that's either here nor there. But I guess looking at a lot of the kids you started working with, in slums and in these difficult conditions, I'm curious to find out like how receptive were they to you and working with you initially? Like what was that reception like, and how did you approach that?
Well, and again, here the media has told us many different things, and it's you only find out how it is once you go somewhere yourself.
Yeah.
One of the first slums I walked into, I simply asked, "Hey, what do you guys need and want? Right? What is it, that would improve your lives?" And actually surveyed the parents and the kids, and I just went and asked, right? Because I'm like, okay, I'm a Westerner. Let me throw everything away that I know, and let me find out from their perspective. And I was shocked, right? Mm-hmm. Because I asked the kids, "What do you want?" He says, "Well, I want to be able to learn." I said, "Really?" Oh, okay. Because I've been told that kids in the slums don't have time for learning or time for education, and that their parents, force them to work, right? Not true. Not true. When I asked parents, "What do you want?" "Well, I want my kid to be able to get an education," right? But there is no access, no possibility. So, okay, what do you guys want to learn, right? And here was my next big shock. They said, "We want to learn English." "Want to learn English?" Okay.
Is that because they feel it's like a gateway to something else because it's spoken so broadly, or what do you think that is?
English is like your trade language. It's an international language, and the world has gone global. So it allows you to get better jobs. It allows you to be in touch with the world, right?
Okay, that makes sense.
I would always say, learn your own language first, your own culture. Is what you should know best. But from a work perspective, from an international perspective, from a global trade perspective, if you know English, it's easier to get better paying jobs. Okay, so this is what they want. So I said, fine. And actually I said, okay, 1:00, be there, I'll start, right? When I started, I had no idea what I was going to do, okay? So I showed up. There were 100 kids there, right?
Wow.
That's
got to be overwhelming, man. Because I remember like being a high school teacher, and I was my first day doing it. They put me in a room with 40 kids, which I was not prepared for. I was overwhelmed with 40, man. You had more than double that.
Yeah, so you're right. I was in utter shock to start with, right? I was like, wow, what do I do, right? And all of these kids spoke Hindi, right? And not a word of English. And I didn't speak a word of Hindi at the time, right? I speak a little now, not fluent by any long shot, right?
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, wow, right? I was expecting 10 kids to show up, right? But I had 100. So I started, right? And really I just started with a very simple learning process, which every mother does instinctively, right? Because when there's no spoken language at first, you can't start with grammar, right? In our modern education system, they start with like, here's your grammar book. Now start doing conjugations. Yet the kid has no spoken vocabulary.
So what do? Do you kind of use objects initially, like like to make it more real, like this is Apple, or like how does that work?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I just look at the environment and say, okay, first we're going to familiarize with the words in the environment, so the kid has some sort of vocabulary to begin with. Yeah. Right.
Well, because you need something to work with, like you're saying. Like if they don't have a basis, it's hard to put the grammar in there.
Exactly. Right, and that's why we do it completely reverse from how they do it in the education system. Right. Grammar is the last thing we do. I just look, I'd point at the floor and I'd say, okay, that's the floor. Where's the floor? Right? And I'd repeat that 3-4 times, and all of a sudden 100 kids are pointing at the floor and saying the word floor. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
And then you go, okay, sky. Where's the sky? Right? And the kids point at the sky. Okay, good. Where's the floor? Where's the sky? Where's the floor? Where's the sky? And the funny part is, the kids take this as a game, right? And in 25 minutes, we have a 20-word vocabulary that the kids know and can use. Okay.
Wow.
unbelievably simple. But every mom does it, right? That's how a mom first teaches language, right? So it doesn't cost anything. It's the simplest thing in the world. And I kind of fine-tuned that and developed, and I started getting flashcards, right? And, because it really, and this is over months, really every day showing up. And once there is a basic vocabulary and the kids are kind of communicating, and I don't correct them on grammar at all in the beginning, right? They'll say, there is chair, or chair here. Wonderful. You get what they're saying, right? We're trying to develop them, right? We're not trying to correct every single mistake. It's like they're doing something right. Good. Validate that. Awesome. Right? And then, the next major barrier we found is the small words of a language. Okay? Let's
I will say they're the ones most commonly taken for granted, right? Like we assume people know what they mean.
Exactly. So you take a word like as, to, and, in, of, right? Everybody's like, oh yeah, I know how to use that. That's a connecting word. Yeah, okay, it is a connecting word, but every word connects, right? Yep. How does this clarify or explain anything? You take and, and has 3 separate meanings. Actually more, but 3 fundamental ones. But, I go to English professors and ask them for the 3 definitions of the word and they don't know, right? And they say, well, and is a connecting word. Yeah, that's true. That is grammar function. But what is its actual use and meaning? Because these small words add meaning to our sentence, right? If we take about 100 small words, are the foundation of the language. If you teach those well, all of a sudden you're set up for literacy. So, and, usually it's used to show that there's more than one thing. I have an apple and a pear, right? That's your first meaning. Secondly, you go, and is used to show difference. Summer is hot and winter is cold. He is tall.
Well, depends on what type of depends on what place you're living. If I lived in Florida,
with what place you live in, right? but wet and dry, right? And shows difference. Rich and poor, and shows difference, right? So that's another way we use and. But nobody explains this to kids, right? Nobody explains this. Yet this is your foundation of literacy. Or and can also be used to show result. I work and get paid, and shows a result. I lift weights and get big muscles. You've experienced that result.
I've experienced that, and then I went back the other way, and I was like, hey, I'm going to lift less weights and become a normal-sized human being.
Exactly, right? So, but here's your 3 ways of using and. But nobody teaches kids this, right? And this is what causes reading difficulties, right? So we developed a program where we made little booklets, with 20 illustrations showing the meanings of these basic simple words. And once you fit those small words in, to, as, on, all these everybody knows words that nobody knows, right?
Because we assume, right? We assume people know them.
We assume people know them, right? But you take a word like to has 30 different meanings in English. 30, right? People are hard put to mention too.
You'll laugh about this morning. So like we just did a new video series for like potential clients, and one of the things one of the videos we have them do is like it's like 3 minutes, but it's like handling some definitions of words they wouldn't know that have to do with their business, or words they think they know which have to do with their business, which that creates even more interesting things. So we were going through it in our marketing meeting this morning. I'm like, so this is one of the words we're looking up. It's public relations. Another one is marketing. Another one is sales. And then we got to leads, and leads has 50 different definitions. I'm like, okay, so let's make sure we get the right one, because we don't want to have like a horse leads to water. Like that could be a huge problem.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Correct. Right. So, but there's only about 100 small words this way. But that once you completely fix this in a child's mind, all of a sudden the world is wide open, because a word like police, hotel, train station. These are not hard to learn. These are simple, right? But the small ones, the small words, I can take 5 words out of your language, right? And you will not be able to make a proper English sentence.
Correct.
Okay? And they will be small, commonly used words. So, and that was really like the gateway, because the moment we started fixing this with kids in slums, all of a sudden they started learning, and learning started being fun, and they started becoming literate.
So that's really interesting. Then I'm curious, like for you, how long did that process take, and when was it really an aha moment? Because like I think it's interesting that looking back on it now, you're saying, "Oh, this is what we noticed," but like when did you realize, like, that's it?
This is a 3-year process, right? Like hindsight is 20/20, right?
Yeah, no, exactly, right? It's like, oh, we found it was this thing.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, I actually went and lived in a slum for a year. Okay.
Wow.
I actually went and lived in a slum for a year. I've slept on a wooden board. I've worked with the kids every day. I got the grammar and English material and literacy materials from the top boarding schools in the world, Oxford. I had materials from some of the top private boarding schools, where, the most privileged children. I had all of these materials, and it was a year of like testing, okay, does this work? And what we started finding out is, they all started, well, here's your rules of grammar, right? Okay. Yeah, but grammar is when you already know the language. Right?
Exactly.
Then
you have to have language to work with in order to use grammar.
Yeah. So this is a year process of testing all sorts of different materials, including Oxford materials, right? And really working and trying to make these materials work, and then seeing, okay, no, we're losing the kids, kids. Right? And finally we kind of went, okay, so what would be the perfect material for a child to learn, right? And like, what is the perfect educational material? This is the question we asked ourselves. Like, what would be the perfect? And when we asked ourselves that question, we went, oh, well, the perfect educational material is something that is simple enough and on a simple enough gradient and has all the information you need. So nobody else needs to explain the material you're trying to teach, right? And the moment we kind of had that vision, we went, okay, it's going to be illustrated booklets, right? So that you're not relying on having an excellent teacher somewhere. No, the child himself or herself can work through the materials and raise literacy. And so we started testing that. So we basically made an illustrated literacy program with over 2,000 images, where the images illustrate the meanings.
That's so interesting, because it's like, I'm going to go back to where we started, and you're talking about floor, sky. It's the same concept, and I think that's why it works.
Yes, exactly, because we can visually show the meanings, right? And this gets pretty advanced, actually, because I first tried to hire illustrators, and it didn't work. The illustrators were great, but the illustrators were not educators, right? So I would say, hey, I need this concept illustrated. I need you to illustrate the meaning of the word as, right? Well, I got all sorts of things back that didn't illustrate the meaning, right? So I ended up having to learn to illustrate myself. Luckily, I know how to use a computer. But then I was like sitting during the day, giving classes in the slums, and then at night figuring out how to use Illustrator, and learning to do illustrations so that I could test it with the kids, right? And finally, I started like getting illustrations that really conveyed meaning, and I'd test them on the kid. Okay, I'd show them to the kids, and I'd see, do they get the right concept or not, right? Mm-hmm. And then we learned something really interesting. It was mind-blowing, and it's going to sound so simple, right? We found out that kids read pictures from left to right, right? So
that makes sense, I guess, because you open the, like, we read left to right, right? But you open the book, and there's the left, and there's the right. Yeah.
Yeah. So they look at the picture left to right, and they follow the picture, right? So if the picture and the sentence are not in the same sequence, then the picture actually destroys the meaning of the sentence.
That makes sense.
And I found this out when I had like, he is short and she is tall, right? And I had like a short boy and a tall girl, okay? But I had the picture switched around where the tall girl was first and the short boy was second. What did the kids think this meant, this sentence, he is short and she is tall? Well, he became a girl and short became tall.
It became the opposite.
It became the opposite because my picture, was in the opposite sequence. So when I found out that was happening, I had to go back and fix all the pictures that I had already done, right? But it was a major, major breakthrough. Because after this, and keep in mind, I'm operating in the slums. I've got, and simply laying down a blanket for kids to sit on, and maybe 115 degrees, and we're, teaching in the shade of a tree or wherever we have space, sometimes under a freeway, believe it or not, right? And we're just testing every day, okay, what works? Because I wanted to go in deep, where nobody else goes, and not have like an academic program, right? Because it's so easy for us to say this and this and this is what a kid should know, and then we can give them a diploma. I'm like, okay, now what works in real life? What are the problems the kid runs into?
Well, that's the program with most math programs out there, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you look at it and you're like, okay, so if somebody's going to be an engineer, they're going to need this, this, and this. If somebody's not going to be that, then they need this, this, and this. Like, yes, you need certain things to think logically, but it's like we've done the same thing in mathematics. We've applied it stupidly.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
Although I will tell you, I use algebra way more than I ever thought I would. I figure out a lot of very complex things by setting up, the right type of equation. But anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But you again nailed it on the head. It's if education is practical, if it's done with understanding, if it's done with a view of what does the kid needs, right? Actually, this simple question, right? Like, what is the product of education? What is the end? What is the end goal of education, right? Now you ask somebody that question, and I don't want to put you on the spot, right? Because this took me a long time to figure out. Like, what is the end product of education? Because everybody keeps telling me, well, it's a diploma, right? And you set up so you can get a job. I'm like, well, that couldn't be true, right? So we went, oh, you know what? And one day it struck like lightning. The end goal of education is that a child or a person is set up so they can achieve their goals, right?
Yeah, because if you can't communicate, there's not many things you can do, right? Like that, it's so vital to have that.
Yeah, and this is where we got to literacy. Okay, so if you really get a child literate, and literate meaning understanding what you read, able to understand what you read, and able to resolve the problems of not understanding what you're reading, right? If you take that definition of literacy, then you enable a child to himself reach out and find out what is it he needs, right? So that he can achieve his goals. So that's kind of, we have some fundamentals, reading, writing, arithmetic, that's, those are basics. But other than that, the subjects should really be tailored to like, what is, the child wants to be an artist, if they want to be a painter, well, guess what? Algebra is going to actually be very useful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because you have to be able to figure out the proportions of everything, which is
the proportions,
really interesting. But then again, like, I was listening to a lecture about this yesterday. Like, then again, like, you even look at like when people give their opinions on art, it's kind of like, well, that's still somebody's opinion. There's really not an idea of what's good art and what's bad art, right? It's somebody's opinion, and you're making somebody like alter based on that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But I think that's really interesting. You're really getting to the heart of what's happening. You're realizing people had kind of the even wrong ideas of what education does. But I guess the question I have for you around that then is, if you look at a lot of how a lot of philanthropic programs work, they don't understand these realities of the human condition. They don't understand these on the ground situations. And I guess when you're looking at that, when you look at that, why is that, and why do you think they overlook a lot of these realities of things?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think, like a lot of these philanthropic, institutions and people, they're super well intended, right? And they are trying to really achieve their goals.
Yeah.
But we're dealing with a really, really fundamental problem, where we ourselves have never been put through school with the view of literacy, meaning education with understanding, with the education being a person who is set up to achieve their goals in life, right? It's all been, if you want to be successful, then you have to have a diploma, right? If you want to amount to anything in life, you have to have a diploma, right? So we've all grown up with that viewpoint, or being told this, or spoon-fed this, right? And in actual fact, some of the biggest, revolutionary companies or individuals, they didn't go to university. They're dropouts, right?
I have a master's degree I do not use, William. Like it's there. I think there's so much to be said for, you have more degrees than a thermometer, and you realize you wonder why you can't get anything done. Like those things just don't matter sometimes, man.
Right. So the first focus, we for so many years we've been told, that what matters is a diploma, right? And that the end product of education is a diploma. And it's good to have a diploma. I'm not going to knock diplomas, and I'm not.
Well, no, I'm not going to knock that either.
But no, there's more to life than a diploma, right? Because after you leave university or after you leave school, that's when real learning starts, right? And that's what's backward, right? Education needs to be geared to real life. And that's one of the biggest complaints I get from professors and teachers, because I do a lot of lectures in universities, I visit a lot of schools. And the one thing that teachers and professors tell me and complain about is that they feel their curriculums are not tailored to real life, right? They know this.
I feel like you and I have had a conversation about this in the past, but if we haven't, there's something I want to bring in here. And if you look at like kind of the purpose of education as it's used modernly, right?
Yeah.
The education we see now is based on the humanistic school, right? It's based off of somebody being able to be a soldier or work for somebody or something like that. It's not based on creating people that can think and do and create. So I think even education as a whole, it should be looked at for like, what are you going to do with this, right? Like we're in for a big disruption, not just in the slums.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the American education system right now is actually fundamentally based on the Prussian education system from the 1800s, and the Prussian, was the German, Hungarian, Austrian Empire, right? And that education and that whole empire was set up on a militaristic and soldier and conquest. So its education system was set up to make soldiers, people who don't think and follow orders, right? And somehow this adopted into the British Empire, and then came over into the US. And we've been using a system that has been made to train kids to be unthinking and follow orders, right?
Because you look at how many entrepreneurs don't fit in that system.
Exactly, and when in fact we need to be doing the opposite, and what set America apart, and what built America was individual thinkers, people who thought for themselves, people who took responsibility, right? But the way you're educated, or the way you educate the child, will make it, will make a big difference whether he thinks for himself or whether he just follows along with the mainstream and follows instructions. And the current education system is set up to make a person who follows instructions and does not think or inspect knowledge, right? Right, and that's why
I don't know if I ever told you, from my personal experience, William. And I may or may not have told you this. I don't remember, because we've had a lot of conversations about this. But in second grade, I was a really smart, high IQ kid. I'd finish my work faster than the other kids, not because I was paying attention to the teacher, but I'd look at it and try and figure it out and whatever, and I'd get it done. So they said to my parents, okay, we're going to put him in the talented and gifted program. I'm like, oh, that's cool. We're going to challenge him a little bit. So what that meant is my projects were just twice as long as everybody else's, not harder, not more challenging, anything like that. So when I realized that, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that, they had a meeting with my parents, and the teacher and the principal were like, so if he wants to stay here, he has to go on Ritalin. And my parents are like, yeah, that's not happening. So it's like we're taking kids that are showing ability, and we're trying to bring them back down to, you know, the level of where we're keeping everybody through teaching.
Correct, absolutely correct. You know, and again, you're hitting it on the nail. You know, they want everybody at the same pace, at the same speed, right? Mm-hmm. But every parent knows their child is a unique individual and is different than every other child, right? Mm-hmm. We as human beings, each one of us is different. We have equal rights, right? We have equal rights, but each one of us is different. Mm-hmm. So to take children and try to fit them into one class model where everybody is the same, right? That's the destruction of the mind of that child, right?
Yes.
Because some of them are faster, right? And some of them want to take more time to more thoroughly understand. And a few of them, well, they need a little extra help. If you force them all to go at the same speed, everyone is unhappy, right? And the really smart ones become troublemakers because you're holding them back, right? And the slow ones, they get mental health problems because they're always running to try and keep up and don't get the time invested in them so they can catch up, right? So, so this everybody at the same speed, terrible system, right?
Yes.
And I think that causes more mental health problems for children than any other factor.
Yes. So let me ask you this, William, because to me, you're passionate about what you do. You seem like somebody that, you see a solution, you see hope. I guess, where do you see kind of the future of literacy and education going based on what we talked about here?
Well, I've been doing this a few years now, and just everything's been coming together. I mean, my dream and my goal, and what I've kind of dedicated myself to at this point is every child in every slum, in every inner city, has equal opportunity to become literate and achieve their goals and dreams. Okay? And that's where I'm headed, right? So I'm running projects in India right now. I have some in slums in Latin America. I just recently restarted a project in South Africa. I'm starting another one in Nigeria. I've got one in Denmark. I've got one in Ireland. And I'm really at a point where I've just completely dedicated myself to, okay, we're going to get true literacy to children. Because every child deserves a shot at a bright future.
Well, William, I've really enjoyed this conversation, man. If people want to find out more about Charity United and more about your programs, where's going to be the best place for them to go?
They can go to charityunited.us, and there you can see some of our current projects. I can be contacted there through the contact form. Also, if anybody's interested, I've made a free illustrated grammar booklet available at charityunited.us/gift. So if you're interested, you can pick up a free illustrated grammar for your kid or for adults. I find that a lot of the materials I've made end up being used by adults. Even in adult literacy programs, and even by people who think they're very literate, it blows their minds, right? Because we fit something in that was never there, was never available in schools in the first place.
Very cool. William Tucker, Charity United, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, man.
Thank you, sir. Absolute pleasure.